let's kick this off. Tell me about your childhood. Where did you grow up? Where were you born? Tell me about all that.
Well, my childhood was growing up in San Diego, California. Actually, I was born. I'm a native of San Diego, California, and I grew up in a neighborhood called Logan Heights.
I've heard of Logan Heights.
Yeah, very tough neighborhood, and that's basically where I grew up at. You know, it was hard. It was tough growing up there. It's the survival of the fittest.
Okay. Yeah, Logan Heights. I've heard it's rough and tough, and there's a lot of gangs there, correct?
A lot of gangs, that's correct. Later on, we moved to further up Logan Avenue on 52nd and Logan, where it was even tougher. We had a very high population of Afro-Americans, so I grew up around a lot of Afro-Americans, a lot of Hispanics. I grew up with a lot of Italians in my life. When I went to school with Italians.
Yeah. Was it close to the border?
Well, yeah, San Diego is close to the border.
Yeah.
It's Tijuana, Baja California is right.
And there's a lot of stuff running in throughout there.
That's right. Yeah. It's a main line of trafficking and all these different types of activities going on at that border.
Yeah. Tell me your relationship with your family. Tell me about your parents.
Oh my parents, first of all, there's 9 children in our family. I'm the 6th one.
How many boys, how many girls?
There was 5 girls and 4 boys.
Okay.
The family, it was crazy, man, growing up in a large family. You're always fighting, you know, you have rivalries with your siblings. You know, you're always trying to get the attention, and at dinner time, you got to get there early, because if you don't,
food's gone.
You know, the food is gone. You know, they already drank all the milk, and so I was always show up early. I was the one that would show up early. I would even be in the kitchen early, talking to my mom just to get a little bit of extra food.
That's right. That's great, man. That's cool. So tell me about, now that you bring up your mom, tell me about your relationship with your mom.
Oh, my relationship with my mom, it was kind of difficult because there was so many of us that we always wanted our mom's attention. You know, having 5 sisters and 3 other brothers, you always want your mom's attention. Most of the time, you know, she spent her time disciplining us because we were crazy. You know, we were always on the street. We were always playing around, just getting into trouble. And, you know, sometimes, you know, my mom couldn't take it. Sometimes she would just kind of just like hide somewhere just to get away from the noise and get away from all that, you know, those things that we were doing. You know, we weren't very well behaved, you know, growing up. I believe some of us even had ADHD, and I don't think we even knew it, like ADHD, hyperactive, you know, and so forth, and things like that.
I mean, I'm sure it was a sense of a strong disciplining love that she had for you guys and stuff, and even though it was tough, right?
Yeah. It was. She was a disciplinarian for sure. She was a disciplinarian.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
Tell me about your dad.
Well, my dad was a longshoreman in San Diego. He was always gone. Sometimes he would work double shifts, 16 hours a day. So I would only see my dad maybe late in the evening when he would come home. By that time, we would all be settling down, ready to go to bed, you know, to get up to go to school in the morning. That's how I remember my father, you know, and I would look outside, he would be sitting out there and he would be smoking. You know, sometimes when he was smoking, I don't think he was always smoking cigarettes. He was probably smoking something different, because I remember how he would smoke the cigarette. You know, it was like he would smoke it actually like you're smoking a joint, you know.
I think he was smoking marijuana.
Yeah, I think he was already smoking marijuana at that time. And you're talking about, I was about 10 years old when I would see my dad sitting out in the front yard.
Wow, so he worked a lot.
He worked a lot. He had, you know, 9 children. Yeah. He had to put the, you know, food on the table, and being a longshoreman is hard work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So tell me, how was your relationship with him? Was he a good father figure? Tell me about that relationship as with your father.
In my earlier years as a boy, I had some good times with him, but since my father had a problem with alcohol and other things that he was probably doing, you know, sometimes he was kind of violent. My father was very violent. He, used to get a little bit carried away when he used to spank us and so forth. And also he was abusive with my mom. I remember when I was about, I would say 5 years old, I seen him actually slap my mom. I was 5 and I have 2 other younger brothers. They were smaller than I, and she was pregnant with my youngest sister. I remember when I was 5 years old, being 5 years old, and my father coming home from work one day, and I'm with my other 2 younger siblings, and my mom was pregnant from the youngest, Jessica. She's the youngest of 9. And I remember my dad slapping my mother, and actually she flew across the living room and hit a lamp that was standing there. And that was the first time I actually seen physical abuse.
You were 5 years old?
I was 5 years old, and I'll never forget that day. It was something that stayed, ingrained in my memory.
Wow. Okay. And how do you remember reacting to that?
I didn't know how to react to it. I didn't know why. There was a lot of questions. Why did my father treat, my mother, his wife, in such a way, and at the same time, being pregnant. I think she was like 8 months pregnant already. Why he would do something. Why would he take a risk of doing that and have my mom lose the baby? Yeah, a lot of questions there.
I remember you vaguely talked about how he went through so much that at one point he wanted to take his life.
That's correct.
Yeah. Expound on that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, my mother and father separated during a very critical time of our lives. I was a teenager, actually. And from the age, I would say, of about 13 to the time I was about 17 years old, my dad moved from San Diego, and he came to Palm Springs, California. And during those years, that's when, a teenager, you need your father. And I remember when we moved to Palm Springs, California, because my mother and father, they reconciled once again. And that was actually my first year, my second year in college, in high school. I was an 11th grader at Palm Springs High School when we moved here to Palm Springs. And that was when my father tried to commit suicide one time. I came into the house, and my sister, Arminda, said that my father was in the room. He had been there a long time, and she didn't know what he was doing in there. And I remember walking in, and he had that rifle pointed at his face. And I said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he just looked at me. I could tell something was wrong. He wasn't all there. Maybe he was under the influence of some type of substance, or maybe he had been drinking, and he was probably depressed. So I remember just going and grabbing the rifle out of his hand, and it just became a tug of war, him and I.
That must have been so intense right there.
It was intense, because I didn't want him to kill himself.
You were in 11th grade, right?
I was in the 11th grade. I was 17 years old.
17, wow.
Yeah, I remember grabbing the rifle, and we started fighting in the bedroom. From there, went into the hallway. Then we're knocking things down, furniture, and we're in the living room. And before you know it, he's trying to, we're out the front door in the driveway, and it ended in the middle of the street. And people our neighbors are looking at, my dad, a father and his son out in the middle of the street.
Yeah.
Somebody called the police, and I was able to actually pull the rifle away from him. And as I pulled the rifle out of his grasp, I took part of the skin on his hand, because he had his hand on, I guess he had his hand on that trigger, I don't know.
That grip on him.
That grip. And I ripped a piece of skin off his hand, and I remember the police coming, and the ambulance was there, the neighbor, everybody was out there. It was a pretty crazy situation. I was, all adrenaline was just rushing through my body, and
take your time, brother, take your time.
So, what actually ended up happening was that, the ambulance came, and they took my dad to the Riverside County Hospital. I guess he was at the psych ward. And he went under a 72-hour evaluation. And I remember going to pick him up, the family, we went over there to pick him up. He was in better spirits, he looked like he was doing a little bit better. And I remember him coming home.
Just to kind of wrap up the segment of your relationship with your parents, without getting into too much detail on your life, because we're going to touch on all that. Your dad became a Christian.
Yes, he did. He became a Christian, I would say about a year and a half after that incident, the suicidal attempt. I believe he was under severe depression, probably suffered from depression, and I think that somehow, the Lord got a hold of him. Actually, it happened through my mom, and because my mom started going to a Spanish ministry, First Assembly of God in Cathedral City, and I think that's how my father was exposed to the Word, to the Gospel. And I remember my dad changing. I remember there was a change that took place.
A new creation.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's so awesome, man, to see that.
Yeah, it is.
Praise God.
Thank God, man.
Yeah.
Thank God that happened.
And you see, your mom went.
Yeah.
She became born again. And
my mom.
What church did she start going to?
She started actually in San Diego. She started was more open to the gospel because we come from a background of Catholicism. We all grew up Catholic.
It's very common.
And when my father actually left and they were separated is when she started, I think, opening up a little bit more. And as we were growing up and getting in trouble and smoking weed, we started smoking weed. I started smoking weed at a very young age. I was about 13 years old at the time.
So your mom was seeing all that, and it's almost like she needed something to deliver her almost.
Yeah, she needed
and that's
something.
When she started going to church and all that. Okay.
That's right. She started reaching out, and that's how it actually started. She started it.
Praise the Lord, man. Praise God.